Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Contrarians. This is another Patreon suggested topic. If you haven't checked out the Contrarians Patreon yet, please consider doing so. It's a fantastic community of music lovers. Well, we love movies too, but mostly we talk about music. You can suggest topics. We talk about the topics that people suggest. We provide feedback on the episodes and just generally enjoy ourselves. They have T-shirts available through TeePublic and lots of other things. Be sure to comment. Now, when it comes to music, the only thing that I love more than talking about Jornlandi is being turned on to new music. Tonight's topic is the best Beatles solo album or the best solo album by a former Beatle. Not really sure how they're going to title it. But this is a topic that I know very little about, so I am looking forward to getting turned on to some new music. Tonight, we're going to start with probably our biggest Beatles fan, and that is Rand. Rand, take it away.
Well, thank you, Reed. I appreciate it. Well, you know, it's funny. I'm going to start with George Harrison. And yesterday, for some reason, I was on Amazon and I was looking at George Harrison albums and I thought, you know what, there's a bunch of those that I've never heard in my life. And I think, why haven't I done that? So I listened to Gontropo and I listened to Somewhere in England and I listened to George Harrison and I listened to Brainwashed, which was the last one he did before he passed away. And I really enjoyed it, but I noticed one thing as a guitar player, he sure uses a lot of diminished chords. I must have heard 155 diminished chords in those 4 albums. I mean, he's constantly using them. And it sounds fine, but he's the only guy that does it, which is really strange. Because, you know, nobody else does this, you know, with the diminished chords. But he makes them work and he's great. And so I'm going to start with him. And I'd have to say the best is this one, All Things Must Pass. And this is the remaster, which is why it's in color, because if everybody's ever seen it, the original cover was in black and white. And this has bonus tracks. This came out, I forgot what year this came out. It was, hard to see it, 2001. So it's a remaster and it's really hot. It's burning hot. It's like vapor trails hot. And it's hard to listen to, but I did want to get it. And it's kind of unique. But every song he's ever done, really the best stuff is on this album. And it seems like his career just sort of goes diving down slow like a submarine, but he gets to Cloud 9 in 1987, comes back up. That's a really good album, really well done. And he had a big hit on MTV with Got My Mind Set on You. And then next, after, you want me to just keep rolling, right? I got to go. So the next is John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band. This is the box set that they put out a couple of years ago. I haven't even listened to this yet. It's got a 5.1 version of the album and everything. I love this record. I listened to it when I was in the Air Force, and it's just John Lennon, Ringo Starr, Klaus Bormann, and there's another guy too. I can't think of it.
It's a little bit of Billy Preston on that.
Yeah. Who's playing bass? Oh, Klaus
Bormann. Yeah.
And then John does everything. So yeah, it's just basically a trio. John does all the lead guitar and there's not much of it. But I love the album because he's so honest and so raw. And it's just so different than everything that they were doing prior to that in the Beatles. You know, I mean, there are touches of it in the White Album and stuff, but Let It Be, and then morphing into the John Lennon Plastic Ono Band is just, I think, pretty good. And then my favorite, I can't do any Ringo because I can't find my Ringo Rama album, which comes with a DVD featuring Eric Clapton and David Gilmour, and for some reason I can't find it. I can't believe I would have got rid of that CD, but I probably just misfiled it when I did my re-alphabetizing, but I don't think I got rid of it. But anyways, to moving right along, Paul McCartney with his wife Linda did Ram. I love this album. I think it's excellent. It's got so many good songs on it. It's just as good as any Beatles album that I've ever heard. But I think his tour de force, his best thing he ever did, was Band on the Run. And this is the box set that I got forgot when I got this. Well, it doesn't say, but anyway, it's got 3 discs in it. It's just extra bonus tracks of stuff. And it's like not as big as the big box set that they recently did. They've been doing a lot of box sets that I can't afford that are just out of my price range. But yeah, if I have to choose any of those as my favorite, is that what you're looking for as one album? I would have to say Band on the Run by Paul McCartney is probably my favorite.
Right. Well, let's be clear now. I'm not looking for anything. This is what you guys want to talk about.
Well, I was just talking about what I read on the Patreon when they sent the thing out.
Right.
It's a Beatles solo album, not albums.
Now, it is an interesting point of linguistics. Do we accept Wings? Does that count as a solo album? Comment below.
Yes, it does. It does.
Yeah, this says Paul McCartney and Wings. Yeah.
I set the topic, so yep, it does.
Oh, you set the topic. There you go.
Yep.
And then this is Paul. This is Paul and Linda McCartney, and she sings backup vocals on it. And I just think Ram is great for the time that it came out. It's what we needed. We were depressed that the Beatles broke up. I was, already 18 or 17 or something like that, and it was just like I was depressed. And when Ram came out, I was in the Air Force, and so it really cheered me up a lot.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Rand.
You're welcome.
Let us move down to Bicycle Legs. Bicycle Legs.
Hello.
Favorite Beatles solo albums. What do you got?
Okay. Well, I mean, Rand's already mentioned a few of the ones that I've picked out, but we'll get to what my absolute favorite is. But I have picked one by each of them as well, just to quickly talk about. And one that Rand didn't mention that I have pulled out is this album from 1973, Ringo.
I was going to say that's probably my favorite, but I haven't heard that many.
That's the best Ringo album.
It is an incredible album. Although, hat tip to if you do like good country music, traditional style country music, Buku of Blues is a wonderful album too. Ringo really has the pipes for country music. But this album, it's a real, this is, he tours with his all-star band these days. And this is an absolute all-star tour de force. You've got all 3 of the other Beatles on it. You've got people like Jim Keltner, Harry Nilsson, just big names. Klaus Voormann's on this. Mark Bolan plays on a couple of the tracks. Nicky Hopkins, it's just an absolute all-star tour de force. The songs are great. Ringo sings well. People like to sort of dump on Ringo's singing voice, but I think he sings these songs wonderfully well. Can I
chime in real quick, Bicycle?
Yeah, sure.
The CD version of that gives you "It Don't Come Easy," which was only issued as a single back then. And also John, Paul, and George are all over that album in different places, not playing together.
Well, 3 of them play together on I'm the Greatest. You've got John, George, and Ringo all there. You just don't have Paul.
Right. And John wrote it.
Yeah. Speaking of John, I had to go with John Lennon Plastic Ono Band. I mean, this album is just so raw. Musically, it's raw. Lyrically, it's incredibly raw. I mean, John and Yoko had been going through primal scream therapy at the time when he wrote these songs, and they are just raw and basic and emotional. Pretty much every song, as Rand said, is either a trio of guitar-based drums or piano-based drums. Very basic production. I'd be interested to hear what a 5.1 mix of this would sound like, because often there aren't even 5 things to be going on with in these songs. There's often just, guitar, bass, drum, vocal.
I haven't heard it yet myself.
But an incredible album, no doubt about it. Again, for Paul, I actually did on my channel, Bicycle Legs, I've done a top 10 albums by Paul McCartney. So go and check that out if you are interested in seeing what my top 10, because it covers his whole career, my top 10.
Nice.
You know, even an album as recent as Egypt Station is in my top 10 Paul McCartney albums. It's a terrific album.
I love that
but
album.
I went with Ram for my favorite Paul McCartney album.
Get out of my brain, bicycle.
when this album came out in 1971, it was absolutely lambasted by the critics.
Yeah.
They were still really, really angry. You got to understand, people these days blame Yoko for breaking up the Beatles. In 1970, 1971, everybody blamed Paul McCartney for breaking up the Beatles because he was the one who announced it. But this album is just an incredible, people have said this is like the Godfather album for indie pop. And I can kind of see that. It definitely has a bit of a homespun kind of feel to the production, not quite to the same extent as his first album did, which was all recorded at home just with him, with a little bit of Linda on backing vocals. This does have some other musicians on it, and the songwriting is definitely more sort of formed than it is on the McCartney album. But it's just a wonderful, wonderful, as I say, you know, sort of godfather of indie pop. But
yeah, it actually gave birth to Wings, because most of the musicians on here went to Wings. I was going to say, though, back when I was like in the Air Force and listening to FM radio in Las Vegas, Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey, and Too Many People were getting airplay all the time. Those were huge.
Yeah, well, Uncle Albert was a #1 hit in the US, so
great song.
But my absolute favorite solo album by the Beatles, bar none, All Things Must Pass, and there it is, the original sepia tone cover.
Yeah, you got the ringware and everything.
This is an original pressing, so it's ancient. This album was George's, it wasn't his first album. He had done the soundtrack for a movie called Wonderwall in 1968. And that's a great album too, and well worth finding if you ever can. But this was his sort of declaration of independence from the Beatles. You know, in the Beatles, he only ever got to do a couple of tracks on each album. It was dominated by John and Paul. And towards the end of his career in the Beatles, George had been storing up all these songs that he couldn't get on the Beatles records. And he just lets them all pour out on. This is a triple album on vinyl. Two records of songs, and then a third record, which is kind of a bonus disc, if you like, of jams that they did in the studio. But the songs on this album are just incredible. It's produced by Phil Spector and George Harrison. It is a full wall of sound production. I think it works. I'm not always a fan of that sort of wall of sound Phil Spector thing. Certainly wasn't a big fan of it on Let It Be. But on this album, it really, really works. It makes the song sound majestic and grand. I mean, it has his massive hit, My Sweet Lord, on it. But you've also got beautiful songs like I'd Have You Anytime, which he co-wrote with Bob Dylan. What Is Life was another hit for him.
Yeah.
My absolute favorite George Harrison song, bar none, is Beware of Darkness. That song is just absolutely achingly beautiful.
Have you seen the Bangladesh movie?
Yes.
With Leon Russell? Oh.
Yeah. You know, beautiful stuff. Art of Dying is an incredible, dramatic song. Just absolutely sort of almost apocalyptic song. It's just really,
Phil
really
Collins
great.
says that he played conga drums on that, but he didn't get credit.
Yeah, possibly. There were a whole bunch of people who didn't get credit for like little itty bitty things on it. But yeah, this is absolutely, without a doubt, my favorite Beatles solo album. Even though Paul is probably my favorite solo artist from the Beatles, like I think he has, not only does he have the biggest catalog, but he has the most consistent catalog. But the one album I go back to more than any other is All Things Must Pass. by George Harrison. So that's my pick.
Bicycle Legs. That version of the record you have, is that like a triple gatefold sleeve? That
Yeah, it is. This is the Australian pressing. It didn't come in a box. It came in. Yeah, it's like like that.
Yeah, I was going to say mine's in a box, and they're notorious for falling apart, like the top ripping off, but it comes with a poster and
cool I don't think I've got the poster, but I've got the Bangladesh box set, and those always are falling to bits, like the lids of them. So,
all right, well, very good. Thank you, Bicycle Legs, guys. In order to keep the conversation moving, let's hold comments until everybody finishes their spiel. That way we don't break up their train of thought. Also, Bicycle Legs, I love Ram being lambasted. Unintentional puns are the best.
Lambasted. Oh, I get it.
I knew we'd get there in the end. All right, let's go with Peter Kirk. Peter, what have you got for our best Beatles solo album?
Well, let's cue the Jaws theme. Dun, 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 dun. The 5 LP box set, George Harrison. This is, bar none, the greatest Beatles solo album. So I, like Brand, have got the CD reissue that came out previous, but I couldn't help myself. I got the 5 LP. It's got the main 3, and it's got 2 LPs of just jam sessions, and it is magnificent. And that's not all. There's actually an 8 LP version, and you can also get a piece of George Harrison's tree off the estate. I think it was like $2,000. The Age of the Disc box set, it's going crazy. But getting back on topic, that is the greatest George Harrison album. It is the greatest Beatles solo album, in my opinion. I think this guy was just full of repressed energy. In the Beatles, he was only allowed 1 or 2 songs. I always thought he was almost my favorite Beatle. I love his guitar tone. I love his songs. And towards the end of the Beatles' career, I think he had some of the strongest material. And, you know, when you're up against the juggernaut, which is McCartney, Lennon, you've got to have some outstanding material. And While My Guitar Gently Weeps, something which in my opinion is top 5 Beatles of all time. And for somebody like Frank Sinatra to say it's one of the greatest songs of the 20th century, that's high praise indeed. Cranky Frankie doesn't like too many. Here Comes the Sun, and it's all documented on the Let It Be mini-series, where, you know, you saw that George left the band because he really wanted his material out there. So I think this album was just an explosion of creativity, of all these stockpiled songs that he could not record, because I know All Things Must Pass he wanted to put it with the Beatles, but it just didn't pass. Pardon the pun. And this sort of was just, he had all these friends together and they were all willing for him to succeed, and it did succeed because it went #1 all around the world. And you've got a who's who of everyone on this album. You've got Ringo, Eric Clapton, Gary Brooker from Procol Harum, you've got Badfinger, you've got Gary Wright, you've got Jim Price. It's a who's who. It's just, you've got the top-notch musicians there, some colleagues, some acquaintances, some friends. They were all willing for him to succeed, and by golly, it did. So going over my favorite songs, My Sweet Lord, so what? It did crib the Chiffons' He's So Fine, but he made it his own. He turned it into a song that is, it's like a hymn. It's like it's just a beautiful song. It's in praise of Hindu god Krishna, but it could be a praise with whoever you believe. It's an evangelical song, and it's a beautiful song, and he made it his own. What Is Life? And you just look who played on that song: Eric Clapton, Bobby Whitlock, Bobby Keys from the Stones, and Jim Gordon. Beautiful, beautiful production, wide sounding, and just a big sound. Wah Wah, that was about, you know, a little bit of a pot shot when he was at the Beatles, and you know, that the sort of fractious Let It Be sessions where he couldn't get his voice heard. That's a great song. I even like his interpretation, If Not For You. Other songs that I like is All Things Must Pass. So this whole album's a rich tapestry of song, musicianship, and it was the peak of his career. He peaked early, and as Rand said, the quality of the albums diminished, but there was always a couple of gems on every album. So Living in the Material World, Dark Horse, even albums like Extra Texture that don't get a lot of recognition, they always had a couple of nuggets on those albums. And yes, he did have a little bit of a burst towards the end. So that's easily my favorite Beatles solo album. An honorable mention, I didn't pick my favorite, every single Beatles solo album, but I'll put a little bit of a shout out to Paul McCartney, Flowers in the Dirt. That needs to get
Great
a bit of recognition. This is a collaboration he did with Elvis Costello. So Paul McCartney in the 80s was sort of waning a little bit. He was doing some really bad duets. I'm talking to you, Stevie Wonder, and I'm talking to you, Michael Jackson. And some of the material was getting a little bit questionable, but he got somebody that was a bit of a counterpoint, because Paul McCartney needs a counterpoint. He needs a John Lennon when you're writing songs to say, put that away, that's crap. Come on, next. You need somebody that gives him a little bit of tough love. And that album, you had the perfect yin to his yang, and that was Elvis Costello and Flowers from the Dirt. And My Brave Face, that's the title, that's the first song on the album. That sets the tone, and it's a really fine album. Some other honorable mentions, Paul McCartney is The Debut. That's a great album. Maybe I'm Amazed. What a song. Yeah. It's killer. I agree, Rams, high quality, and Band on the Run as well. One more I'll mention is John Lennon Double Fantasy. It may not be the greatest John Lennon album, but it's got an emotional connection to me because of the, close proximity to what happened to John and all the things that were happening. And it's got some of his most heartfelt songs, even if it's a little bit of a split between him and his wife, Yoko Ono. I've got a bit of an emotional connection to that album, Double Fantasy. But in summary, Heads and Shoulders, All Things Must Pass. Sorry, maybe we're getting a bit repetitive, but it is the greatest Beatles solo album, in my opinion.
All right, Peter, thank you very much. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of mentions of All Things Must Pass. Was very happy to hear Bicycle Legs refer to Ringo Starr's all-star band. He's the only Beatle I was ever privileged to see live, and Ringo is the most casual, godlike rock star I have ever seen. The man is Ringo Starr, and he knows it. Just the most amazing show. All right, let's go down to David. David, what have you got for your favorite Beatles solo album?
All right. So picking a favorite Beatles solo album is as difficult as picking a favorite Beatles album or like a favorite Beatles song. So this is a revolving title, I guess. And, for those of us that like to consider ourselves Beatlemaniacs, and we know that we're not posing or anything like that, we like to think of the Beatles as like the Olympians who created every album with the degree of calculation that, that was given to like an epic novel like War and Peace or Lord of the Rings. But sometimes it's actually more like Dr. Seuss or Winnie the Pooh. I feel like these guys are having a good time sometimes, and that's what brought the great music. So my recent favorite, which, I'm kind of ashamed that I never paid attention to this, but about 6 months ago, I went deep diving and I came out with this. Ringo Starr's Bukus of Blues. I just happen to get into country a bit. I like some of that old country sound, and I've never been able to sit through an entire Ringo album. I probably have like 2 songs that I have enjoyed that he's done. So there's a lot more that I need to keep going back to because he does have a wealth of catalog there. But when I went to go try to find out information on this album, Ringo had released 2 solo albums in 1970. The first album, Sentimental Journey, was just like traditional covers. And then he does a country western album. And this didn't even chart in the UK. So he obviously... The weird thing about Ringo is that it seems like with the juggernauts of Harrison, Lennon, and McCartney when the Beatles broke up, it almost seems as like a Ringo solo career is a vanity project when you look back on it. When I tried to do research on this, he had started dabbling in acting. Obviously, they all did because of the movies that they had. But as far as he started in quite a bit of movies like towards the 70s and 80s and whatnot. I remember Caveman, but I don't remember much of anything else. And he also, I guess, was moonlighting as a furniture designer. And this footage of this on YouTube. So there wasn't really a lot of talk behind these couple of albums. It was kind of like the whole rebranding of Ringo in 1973 when it seemed like that was him taking himself serious as a solo career. But he basically just grabbed a gentleman I'm not familiar with named Pete Drake, went to Nashville with a few session musicians, and they wrote an album like in a week or so, pretty quickly. And if you're a fan of, I happen to really like Bob Dylan's Nashville Skyline. That's my favorite Dylan album. I love Neil Young. So you're thinking like Harvest or Comes a Time. And of course, probably my favorite Rolling Stones album is Exile on Main Street. If you can sort of like, if you're not a country fan and you can, sort of want to dip your toe a bit and take that risk to listen to a different sounding type album, Ringo's obviously having a ball here. He had definitely done that Buck Owens cover on the Help album, Act Naturally. I think he'd worked with Carl Perkins live at some point. So he was having a ball, and he obviously was fearless. He just didn't care. He was doing music that he felt like was going to bring him joy in a really, dour time. It's 1970 and it's the Beatles. Like, they just broke up. So I recommend that one just because it's definitely one that you never hear about. If we're going to go down the line, though, and we're going to talk about each pick from each solo member, I'm going to parrot everybody on George Harrison. All Things Must Pass is just, that's like a physical graffiti. It just has so much material on it. It's basically like a greatest hits. And he had quite a bit of time to write it, and it shows. It's a masterwork. That ends up coming off like some sort of Leo Tolstoy novel. My favorite John album has fluctuated lately for the past couple of years. Walls and Bridges. One thing about Walls and Bridges, the 1974 album, it's his fifth, if you count the third one being with Yoko as a solo album. And the thing about Walls and Bridges is that at first I wasn't that crazy about it. I really liked Number 9 Dream. There's a lot of orchestration on this album and a lot of sort of augmentation that some people get turned off by. I happen to think it's great. John Lennon is still being his retrospective self or introspective self. What's the difference? I'll have to look up. But he's looking at himself, and he's basically in the middle of the Lost Weekend period, which for those that aren't familiar with the Beatles lore was like a year and a half when he left Yoko, and he just went and partied all the time with like Harry Nilsson and Keith Moon and some of the other like usual suspects. So what's interesting about this one is that this is the first album that Lennon's done since like the Technicolor Beatles, the Sgt. Pepper Magical Mystery Tour Beatles, that doesn't have Yoko around. And I think that there, again, if you look at the album cover, he's not taking himself seriously. He's I think the number one hit from this was Whatever Gets You Through the Night with Elton John. That's just like a celebratory song. Like, this is like the beginning of like the disco era, and John Lennon looks ridiculously, I think it's cool. He looks ridiculous in some of these costumes that he came out with like during the 74, 75 period before he did his little semi-retirement. And he's just having a good time on this album. man, if you ever want to get in a romantic situation, dim the lights and put on the song Bless You. That is like, I don't know, that is the lazy river of lazy river songs. Like when you have a glass of wine and you just are in complete, I guess like inebriation. And that's kind of what John was about, like a lot at that point. He was really getting rid of a lot of those demons. It's very much not classic Ono Band, which is a masterpiece, and it's Ono Band is very stripped down and raw. And this is more about trying to, it's more uplifting. And if you can forget that he was going through such an awful time with his addictions and stuff like that, you can appreciate that Lennon was having fun. Lennon was trying to get back into the childhood that I guess was compromised. My last pick, Paul McCartney. This is no surprise at all. The debut, McCartney. This is probably my second favorite album of all time, period. So this is, you know, for those of us that, for those of you that have seen the Get Back documentary that came out like about a little over a year ago, it's around Thanksgiving 2021. There's a scene where the camera is just putting a close-up on Paul McCartney, and his eyes are glassy with tears because George Harrison had just left the band and they were expecting him to show up in the studio to record, and he just wasn't showing up. And that moment of him just dealing with the breakup itself is what I think of when I listen to the McCartney album, which he recorded later on in pretty much the cold winter months of the end of 69 and early 70. That album was this like woven piece where it's just a bunch of catharsis. The Beatles breakup, since, you know, I was a kid, was always like the greatest divorce in pop music history. And to have these moments where you have the other members kind of like, I was thinking about this. They basically released like the Kiss solo albums the right way. Like everybody had stellar solo albums, in my opinion, in 70. And McCartney's first album is just really, it's raw. He plays every instrument himself. It's very personal. It's very intimate. And for people that enjoy lo-fi music that has a, you know, he as well, not taking the songs that seriously. They're short songs. They're all sort of woven together. They're little ditties. And that's basically why I love that album so much. It always goes down great as like one giant piece of music. I never really want to go skip things. Maybe I'm Amazed is a big hit. Sounds like the leftover ballad from Let It Be in a sense. And by leftover, I don't mean that meaning it should have stayed out. I think they're masterpieces. I love Let It Be. I'm a huge Let It Be fan. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. I guess Contrarian pick a little bit by picking a Ringo album for the one that I'm putting up, but I can't stop listening to it. There's a little bit of fatigue with the other ones because I've listened to them for like decades, and this one's new and fresh. So hopefully the viewers and maybe some people on the panel will get some fresh ideas from some of these albums that they haven't been spending much time with either.
Very good, David. Thank you very much. So a couple of real quick little interstitial stories. There is a guitar player named Jay Mailer. This is a Ringo Starr trivia, who is married to Ringo Starr's daughter. He currently is the guitar player for Liam Gallagher, the former singer of Oasis and current solo artist. And Jay is probably the second coolest guy on the planet after his father-in-law. Also, as a huge Johnny Marr fan, I read Johnny Marr's biography, and he talks about talking to Paul McCartney after the Smiths broke up. And he was just laying it all out to him and just, you know, telling him what a horrible time they went through with the breakup of the Smiths. And McCartney told him, well, that's bands, isn't it?
Awesome.
So I love that story. All right, let's finish it off strong with Butch. Butch, what have you got for your favorite Beatles solo work?
Okay. Well, I think, I don't know if I so much misunderstood the topic, but I only really prepared for one as my favorite Beatles solo album. First, let me say, I think the best Beatles solo album is All Things Must Pass. But I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, it's the best one and it's close to my favorite, but actually my favorite Beatles solo album is this one, which if I didn't have my background blurred, I mean, we know it's the Ringo. Fix this here.
Yeah, real hard to make that out.
Yeah.
This album here.
That's
That one.
it. He's Bicycle Legs got me there. I shouldn't have put the blur on. But you know, this was the first Beatles solo record I got. My grandmother bought this for me, not this copy. This one actually could use a bump up. The cover's pretty beat, but it does have the it does have a nice booklet in it that has artwork for every song. And but I just always loved this record. Like, it's just, I guess the word that, and when I was doing some reading online about it, the word that comes to mind for me for this record and is mentioned in almost every review is how much fun this record is. I mean, it's just it's a good time, makes you feel good record. I mean, and you know, Bicycle Legs summed up a lot about this record. I mean, I don't want to belabor the point, but you know, the musicians on this record, from, you know, just the Beatles themselves spread out over the record to Robbie Robertson and Steve Cropper and Mark Bolan and Billy Preston and Nicky Hopkins, James Booker. I mean, it goes on and on and on. I mean, it just, the musicianship on the record is amazing. The songwriting is top shelf. I mean, you got Lennon turning in a great song, and Harrison's got songs on here, and McCartney gave him a song, and Ringo's songs are great too. I mean, just all around, I just think everything about this record, from the recording to the playing, I think Ringo's voice sounds wonderful on it. He's underrated. I mean, he's not going to win any awards for being Pavarotti, but he has so much character in his voice. And I just always like Ringo's voice. I mean, even when he sounds like, you know, like he's maybe not close to being on pitch or whatever, I love Ringo. And you know, so many songs on this record, like, you know, I'm the Greatest is great. And I really love Photograph. I think that's a great pop song. I mean, really well done. Maybe the lyrics wouldn't stand up as well today, but his version of Year 16 is, I mean, that's a fun song. I mean, I really enjoy that song. I always have since I bought this record. I like the country vibe of Sunshine Life for Me, especially there's the bit at the end where the vocals overlay and they're overlapping. And let me see, you know, I love Have You Seen My Baby, the Randy Newman song, but you know, Mark Bolan, his style is all over that. It's almost like a, you know, a glitter rock kind of thing. Let's see, Devil Woman straight up rocks. And I love on You and Me, the last song at the end of the song. Like, it just typical, I think, of Ringo's sense of humor is, you know, he just starts listing, you know, doing his thank yous at the end of the song, you know, to you know, the people that played on the record and helped them put the record together. I just think it's a great record. I mean, it's just, you know, it might not be as advanced as something like All Things Must Pass or some of the things McCartney or Lennon did, but it's definitely probably the most fun record any of them have done. And I love it for that reason. It's a great listen. I'm glad I reconnected with it too. Like when this came up, it was the first one I pulled off the shelf. My initial impulse was to go with All Things Must Pass because I really love that record. The Art of Dying is one of my favorite songs of, you know, pretty much all time. And the title track of that is amazing. So in addition to everything else on that record, it's just a brilliant piece of work. As far as like some honorable mention kind of things, though, I love Buku Blues. That's great. I just, you know, got into that record over the last year. I got a copy of it. I had never heard that before. And I've, as I've gotten older, appreciate country music more. And I really like album. That's a great one. As far as McCartney goes, I love Band on the Run. I actually have a soft spot for Tug of War. I think there's some really good songs on that record.
That was actually number 2 on my Paul McCartney top 10. So there you go.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, it's another one. Like, I just dove into that like over the last year and a half or something. Like, I got that record and I didn't know what to expect because of the time period, and I was just like floored by that album. I really liked it. Lennon has always been a bit I always find his albums to be a bit patchy. Part of it, I don't know, I'm not as well acquainted with some of his Lennon solo records, and I need to check some of them out. Part of the thing I have with Lennon is I really don't care for the contributions that Yoko has on some of those records. So it makes some of them a little bit of a hard listen. I do like the Plastic Ono Band record a lot, but as far as favorite goes, the one I come back to is the first thing I had on vinyl, and then I got it on CD, and it's cheating because it was something Geffen put out called the John Lennon Collection that has like just every great hit that the guy had is on there. And I also have a soft place for rock and roll. I just think that's a cool record. But I find like his solo albums in general, there's great songs spread out across them, but I just haven't found one that I really like has connected with me yet as a whole. Maybe Plastic Ono Band came the closest. I do like Double Fantasy, but just not as much as some of the other records the Beatles have done. So those are my honorable mentions. You guys all had great picks too. Peter, I wanted to ask you quick how do you find the sound quality on that George Harrison 5 LP set? Because I hedged on buying it because I read reviews that people weren't thrilled with it, but
it's got a very warm sound, and just the bass, the bottom end sounds beautiful. It's very crisp. I think they've done a really, really good job, and I was quite surprised by the outtakes and the rehearsal material that makes up the remaining 2, because you've got the core and you've got the other 2 albums, right. And really crisp. So it's really worth getting.
All right, I'll put it on the list. Yeah. And also, David, you mentioned Caveman, and I can remember watching that movie when I was a kid. That I must have seen it a zillion times on HBO or one of those pay channels when I was a kid, and that movie is a scream, I think. But
used to be on HBO every hour on the hour.
Yeah.
Terrible.
And Ringo Starr secured a Bond girl.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. Catherine Bach. Barbara Bach. Sorry. Catherine Bach was on the Dukes of Hazzard. That's a different show. All right, everyone. So there you have it. A wide variety of Beatles solo output. Lots of new albums for me to check out. The only one I've really listened to out of all of those is All Things Must Pass. My wife is a big fan of the John Lennon solo stuff, though. So comment below if you think the Traveling Wilburys should have had more love in this show. Join us next time on The Contrarians. You never know what topic we're going to be talking about. I don't know what topic we're going to be talking about, but it's always a good conversation, and we're glad to have you here. Again, check out the Patreon. It's a great place to be. Guys, thanks everybody for joining us. Had a blast. And we will
spend time with you guys.
See you next time.